much. I want to invite my audience to join the conversation. We have 1 hour to do that, and I expect the conversation to be much broader than the one we've just had. There are many issues that I'm sure Vish, Kwamina, and Madam will like to address, and I'm hoping that the audience will help us get to the bottom of that. If you have the microphones ready, if you have a question or a contribution, you simply raise your hands, and our ushers will come around with a microphone, and you can ask your questions and make your contributions. May I see hands, please? Great. We'll take 3 questions and contributions to go before we come for the next round. You please mention your name, and then you could fire away.
Okay. My name is Azubike, FBN Bank. I think I have 2 or 3 things. One is that I think the introduction of the GRR as the new benchmark pricing for loans in the market is very impressive, because it's helped drive down the cost of loans. And one of the reasons that we had huge loan losses, particularly, was because of the cost of the loan. Whenever somebody pays 30% for loans, or 5% for loan, 40% for loan, of course the loans will go bad. I mean, they won't be able to pay at the end of the period. So I think we must commend Bank of Ghana for doing that. The other thing is that, I believe that continuing to do that and continue to ensure that we bring down the rates, is very critical for the market, so that we can continue to have an improved market. Secondly, so we still talk around that GRL when we get to that point. I mean, that's also, I'd like to comment on it too. That's one question and one comment. The other one is the 400 billion we are bringing recapitalization. We are bringing recapitalization. I think it's fantastic. The deal-making ability in markets will improve, and at the end of the day, loan losses will be, well, people have made losses. I mean, they can be recovered. But there's a third item, which is the behavioral change and corporate governance issues. While she's mentioned all the things that will be done on the behavioral change, I think I'd like to ask what we are going to be doing about the credit bureau practices or reporting. There has to be some policy around how to use credit bureau reporting in this market. Right now, you're only allowed to use maybe one credit bureau, but I think one, what I'm trying to do, there should be at least 2 or 3 credit bureau reportings, and they should be taken seriously. If your name appears there as a bad loan, there should be some policy that makes all the banks say to you corporately, we will not support your business because you have a bad loan somewhere. So what are there policies that have been raised around behavioral management based on credit bureau reporting? Because I think this will be the third leg that we must put in place to keep our business together and not create new losses again when we get to that 400 billion mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more hands, please? Yes.
I'm Solomon from Barclays. So mine is more like a suggestion to the central bank. In the wake of the administration, KPMG taking over Unibank as the official administrator, I think Bank of Ghana stated that Unibank hid certain information from central bank, for that matter, their published financials. So I'm thinking, will Bank of Ghana consider the idea of publishing banks' financials on BOG's website, okay, such that it gives financial analysts the credibility that Bank of Ghana has looked at banks' financials thoroughly, and they are okay with the figures, the ratios, and so they are okay to put it out there, right? So, I mean, banks should be allowed to publish it, all right, but once it's on Bank of Ghana website, I think it lends some credibility to the financials that banks put out there. And my second suggestion has to do with the work of the auditors. In the case of UT, Capital, Unibank, I mean, they were audited by really great auditors, but, things were still hidden. I'm thinking maybe Bank of Ghana should be the one paying the auditors rather than the banks. So in other words, Bank of Ghana should charge the banks and then pays the auditors. So the auditors are accountable to Bank of Ghana, and so they can actually deep dive in their audit and bring out hidden things to the general public and the financial analysts and investors out there and depositors especially, so that we can trust the numbers that are put out there that are for the banks. Yeah, those are two humble suggestions.
Great, thank you very much. Do you have one more, or I should just get we have one more there. I'll take that. One last question. Okay, there's one at the back. Okay, good.
Yeah, my name is Daniel, and I'm an accountant. So mine has to do with, for those of us who are not directly in the banking side, we are now seeing that the regulator, which is the Bank of Ghana, is up and doing. And then we would want to congratulate them. But then I also believe that it will be fair for them to also admit that they have failed us, and it's the reason why we are in this state now. My main issue has to do with, we are all being kept in that, we are all speculating because we all don't know, is it my bank that is next on the list? Because just some few weeks back, we heard about Sovereign Bank, and we all don't know which bank is coming next. So this issue about the bank receiving monies and all that, yes, they are receiving monies, but then it is because people do not have where to send their monies. They still would have to send it to the banks, all right, but then they are still not certain in their minds if indeed their bank is next. So if it will be appropriate, can they just publish and then we'll all be clear in our minds and then we'll all know what to do? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll come back and take more questions, but I would allow my panelists to address. Vish, I'd like to take the question on the auditors being accountable to the Bank of Ghana instead of taking monies from the banks that you're auditing. What's your comment on that?
I think that the auditors of banks do actually work closely with Bank of Ghana in the course of their audit work. I'm not sure how it would work legally for auditors to be either engaged by or paid by the central banks. Banks are companies like any other, except that, because of their specialized nature, they are licensed and regulated by the central bank. And the auditor actually is engaged by the company reporting to the shareholders at the AGM. If you look at the banks you mentioned, Capital and UT in particular, it's not as if they had audit reports that had been signed off. I think you'll find that both of those banks were struggling to get their audits completed for about 2 years or so before the licenses were eventually revoked. So I guess what I'm saying is that where there are problems, the auditors do actually pick these up, and the signals are there. What has happened previously, perhaps, is that there have been efforts between the auditor, the regulator, the bank itself, largely between the bank and the regulator, trying to resolve the issues. I'm not sure that we can go down that route. I think that with the stronger regulation that we're seeing, the current framework should be sufficient and should work.
Okay. Madam, what did you say? The two questions about transparency and giving customers the confidence, and I think the last question, I guess, made the point. Giving us the confidence so that we know, he says he's wondering which bank is next. Is my bank next? I don't know. And publishing the bank's financials on your website so that we can all go and read. And so if I read and my bank is not doing well and is in red, then I take my own decision. What do you make of that suggestion?
Well, I think that the current practice already is that banks publish their financial statements running in the national dailies, for a while. So that information is already available in the public domain. And I'm not sure that actually putting that on BOG's website adds anything to it. The banks, we require the banks to publish their financial statements, just for the same reason, so that everyone can have access to it.
I guess just on a practical example, in the Unibank case, in the statement you issued, you mentioned that even yourselves were having challenges getting access to them, and that you had gone there one time and you were actually denied. And so we're wondering if maybe if you put it on your website, then we know this is certified. The Bank of Ghana had checked it, and the Bank of Ghana says once it's on your website, it's what is authentic, what you have verified?
That's tricky. Let me explain why. So again, let me stress the fact that financial statements are published already. As Vish said, in the case of UT Bank and Capital Bank, they had not published their financial statements in a couple of years. So that's a separate matter. And you'll be well within your rights to say, well, why did the Bank of Ghana not enforce the requirement for them to publish their financial statements? But that's a separate issue. All banks are required to publish their financial statements to make it publicly available. Now, it's another matter asking the central bank to sort of confirm what an external auditor of a bank has said. We are not a firm of auditors. We expect banks, the shareholders, and the directors, principally, to ensure that the financial statements that are audited, first of all, that are prepared accurately, and that their external auditors can certify that the financial statements represent the strength of the bank, the correct or the true financial health of the bank. Let me add that the Bank of Ghana, as a supervisory authority, also has the power under our law to commission special audits where we have cause to not trust the numbers or where we feel that there's something amiss. And you would have heard that in 2016, we commissioned an asset quality review, an AQR, which was repeated last year. That's an example of the additional power we have, not only to make banks audit their accounts and publish them, but also to actually go in and do a deep dive and look at specific issues.
Did you publish the outcome of the audit publicly?
No, that's not public information.
Well, that's what he's asking.
But that's
so you should tell us
the
banks that you found that were in red, and so we can all make our own decisions.
There's got to be a balance between transparency and market stability. Okay. And we take that very carefully.
Yes, Vish, and I'll come to you. I know you have a lot to say, but Vish has a quick point on that.
Just to add to what Deputy Governor has just said, I think the truth of the matter is that the information is out there. The banks do publish their financial statements, and if you go into the bank branches, it's actually posted over there. I think the issue we're grappling with is it comes back to governance, let me put it that way.
Okay.
Because management run these organizations day to day. You cannot reasonably expect the regulator to know what is happening on a day-to-day basis. An auditor will do their work based on international standards, but ultimately they are working with management, and where you have collusion, for example, or outright improper practice or fraud, that then becomes a problem. So the way to deal with that is exactly what I think the Bank of Ghana has done, which is to have a governance framework with certain requirements that will bring in independent oversight and input to make sure that things are moving in the right direction. But to the question, the information really is out there. And if the information is not forthcoming, like in the case of the banks that I referred to that had not published, if you're a stakeholder, a depositor, a trade partner, or anything of that nature to one of these banks, then you need to be asking yourself questions as to why that information is not coming.
Okay, and I guess it comes back to a point, Kwamina, you made. Okay, you said the banks had the responsibility, but I guess what I've just heard is that customers have a responsibility as well to actively seek for that information. And if you can't find it on your website, then you begin to ask questions. If you ask questions and you don't get the answers you want, then you begin to advise yourself, because ultimately, you are ultimately responsible for the penny you put in the bank. So you should be actively seeking for information. If you can't find it, then you can act as a rational investor. You have something to say on this?
I do, and I think I wholly agree with the comments that have been made on regulation and audits and information. And I want to touch on the behavioral bit. I think Vish had highlighted the fact that, you know, as depositors as well as depositors and as well as stakeholders in the industry, we need to keep our eyes and our ears to the ground. I think the fact that financial information is not available is a data point. I would look to other data points, deposit rates. when I made the comment earlier about the need for a shift in behavior, I did admit that the banks would need to change, as well as the regulator would also need to make some shifts. I think depositors need to make a shift in that there's a penchant in Ghana in search of the highest yield or the highest rate. And one of the first things we learn in class, finance class, the first day of class, is that there's a link between risk and reward. And all things considered, the higher the rate of a deposit, the higher the risk of the loss of that deposit.
Bottom line, the higher the possibility that you might lose everything you put there.
Correct. And I think one of the, someone from the audience had made a point that when interest rates are so high on loans, you also have a higher risk of not being repaid on the loan. And so, there are data points out there where you can observe, banks charging very high rates for loans and charging or offering very, very high rates for deposits. And I think the Bank of Ghana publishes the deposit rates for all the banks. And so if you take a cursory look at the range of deposit rates, it gives you a sense of who has to offer you a much higher inducement to bring the liquidity or bring the cash to them. So I'm saying that there are data points out there where consumers can make more informed decisions. And I think that, the penchant for hopping from bank to bank, looking for that higher rate, is something, that higher deposit rate, is something that consumers should be well aware that as you move from a low deposit instrument into a higher deposit rate instrument, you're actually taking more risk. It's a choice that you make, but like all choices, there are consequences to it.
And that is emphasizing the point that as customers, we have a responsibility. And when the banks go under, we blame the Bank of Ghana and blame the banks. We should also take some of the blame. Maybe the signs were there. And the word is greed. It can land into big trouble. There's a final question that was asked about credit bureau practices. And I want to bring you in, Madam Awaji, on this. And the question was, what is the internal mechanisms to allow banks to, I guess, have a platform where they can monitor if I had taken a huge loan from Stanbic and I'm running away to another bank? How can the bank know that I already owe this at the bank, I haven't probably paid, but I'm coming? Is there a system like that? And I guess that was at the heart of the question that was asked.
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, it's a very important question. As the questioner said, it really shapes behavior, the behavior of borrowers and of banks as well. And if it's working well, it should help in promoting good credit practices. When the Credit Reporting Act was enacted some 12, 13 years ago, it created a framework for licensing private credit bureaus. And I think that we have about 3 licensed as of now. Now, the law was very clear that to make the system work, every bank had to report on the credit behavior of their customers, the good and the bad, and everything in between. So every bank was supposed to sign up with each of the licensed credit bureaus and provide information on every customer. This is the customer's credit behavior. This is a pattern of checks bouncing, for example, or being dishonored. This is their behavior. On this date, they applied for a loan. On this date, they serviced their loan. All of that information was to be submitted to every credit bureau licensed under the Act. At the same time, the Act required every bank, before making a loan, to access a credit report on an applicant from each of these credit bureaus to be part of the credit risk assessment process, right? So that framework is there. These credit bureaus have been licensed, they've been operating, and we understand that the system hasn't worked as it was intended to work. Not all the banks are reporting on their customers. Some of them apparently were not reporting on their good customers because they didn't want other banks to poach them. And then some banks are not actually accessing credit report on applicants before they approve a loan application. So in short, the system isn't working. The system isn't going to work if not all banks are complying with the requirement. Because if you have only half information, you're not going to make a good assessment on borrowers. So it's incumbent on everyone to fully participate, all the banks, to fully participate in the credit bureau system by reporting and by accessing reports on the customers. Now, we have identified a few gaps in the regulatory framework, and we are coming up with regulations that will go to Parliament that would strengthen the credit reporting framework so that it will be more incumbent on banks to do this. I mean, they're already required to do it, but we're going to make it even more stricter, just so that if banks don't do that, there are sanctions that are applicable.
So these new regulations will come with sanctions?
Yes. It would bite. Let me just say that it will make it more effective. Okay. It will make. We were hoping that the banks would find this as very important, just so that they themselves would comply. Yeah. You know, because the frameworks are provided. So we're hoping banks themselves would have to comply. And some banks are doing it sometimes. We want a situation where all banks comply at all times. And that's what we're working on.
I'm just curious, and whether new regulation is the way or simply enforcing the existing one. Shouldn't the Bank of Ghana be cracking the whip if the existing regulation allows you to wield a whip? Crack it. I mean, if the Bank A is not complying, it's not reporting, apply the sanction.
Both.
Okay.
So we're doing both.
So have you done one in the bank's case?
We're working. What we're trying to do is understand what's going on. What's the problem?
You know, you've diagnosed the problem right now for me.
We know they're not complying, but we're trying to understand why. It's important to understand what's working. Are the credit bureaus themselves not doing well? What is really going on? And so it takes time to understand that. We really want to we know they're not doing it, but why? And what would really work? There are regulatory issues. We're taking care of those. There may be operational issues, and there may be just behavioral issues. So we want to really attack it in a holistic manner. That's what we're doing.
I want to take more questions from Greg, my good friend. Please give to Nana. Microphone to Nana. Do I have more hands in the back? Yes, and then there are 2, 3. Do I see a lady's hand? Because after Nana, I want to hear from a lady, just so that we can have some variety. Yes, Nana.
Yes. Mine is on the exemptions that the regulator often gives to the banks in terms of publishing their financials. PwC annually produces the banking survey, and fortunately, Vish is the author. Now, that survey gives an idea of the banks that have submitted their accounts. And when we had the last one with 36 banks, less than 30 had access to those accounts, which meant that about 6 had not published, and somehow they've been given exemption. Even if we drill down to UT Bank, there was a point where the stock exchange suspended their shares because they had not published their accounts. Somehow, a day or two later, it was reinstated. Don't know whether the regulator gave the green light for them to go ahead. So these exemptions must be looked at by the regulator, because as we speak, there are still some banks who have not published. If, as Kwamina is suggesting, there are data points that we have to look at, and these statements are not published, it becomes very difficult for us to see those data points because the accounts are not there. The regulator has not named and shamed them that you haven't published. And so the ordinary investor is in the dark as to those who are obeying and those who are not obeying.
Great, and I guess it comes back to the first one, publishing, naming, and shaming. And Nana is backing that as well. Let me get more. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much. My question...
May I know your name, please?
My name is Nana Amo.
Great.
And I've been in cocoa for about 24 years. And one of the major issues that continue to confront the cocoa industry, especially the downstream, has been the banking relationship between the farmers and the banks. For quite some time, I think we're all hoping that the rural banks were going to create the enabling environment that will facilitate farmers' access to credit and also to do just ordinary banking. But it seems to me that now the discussion has shifted completely from rural banks and the farmers have been left in the lurch. I'd like to know from the second deputy governor if the Bank of Ghana has lost focus on the rural banks and their ability to help the farmers. Because I'm asking this because we get $1.something billion dropping into this economy and is channeled through these farmers. That what I'm not seeing is a very effective policing of the movement of these funds, the usage of these funds, and how, at the end of the day, these farmers have imbibed, one, the habit of savings, and also taking monies from these small banks to help the local economies within which they live. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more.
I'm Mr. Bernard Osei, a qualified accountant. My challenge is that normally the Bank of Ghana come on on-site auditing, but I will be very happy to see that this on-site report by the Bank of Ghana auditors are made available for public consumption. And besides, we have the auditors preparing the long-form report for the banks. And this long-form report are filed with Bank of Ghana. They are not available for public consumption. You go to the bank, you only see a published financial statement, but not the long-form report, which contain a lot of details about the ratios. Is there you see whether the bank is performing or not performing, whether it's satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or critical. If such information are made available for public consumption, it will be of a help to the investing community. And besides, you see most of the audited, you have the management letter. Is there you see whether the bank is complying or not complying. And this management letter is also confined to the management and the board. It is not available for public consumption. So if such things are made available for public consumption, it will be an opener to the investing community. Thank you.
Just before you hand over the mic, because this is the fourth question I'm hearing on transparency, publishing, and etc. So we've had quite some responses already. And so I want to throw back a question, although I'll still give them an opportunity to respond. Something that Madame said, which is they need to, do this delicate balancing act between transparency and maintain the stability of the banking sector. Because if you publish the audited accounts and I see it, I will panic. I will withdraw my money from the bank, and any right-thinking person who will do same. So what you tended to avoid will happen, because then the bank will go down anyway. I guess that's what you're trying to say, that you need to draw that balance. So seeing that response, throwing that response back to you, how can the Bank of Ghana do that? Still publish all the details of the audit and still maintain stability in the sector? Use a microphone. Can you please turn on the microphone, please, for me? Yes. Try again, let's see. Sound, please, let's fix that. Because I want us to not only have the conversation with the panel, but let's have it among ourselves. Because it's an important point. And if 4 questions have come on this. Obviously, that is important to people, not only in this room, but to those who are listening to us out there. People want information so they can act. But how do you do that without causing, collapsing the entire industry? Beyond him, if anybody has a contribution to that, I'd love to hear it. Is it on? Yes, sir.
The bank is protecting the money that is being put in their hands by the depositors. So the depositors also need information about how sound the bank is run, so that it will enable them to take prudent financial decisions, whether to give their money to you or not to give their money to you, because you are trading with their money. Chief fund, somebody put money in his current account, you are taking charges. And you must know how you are running that money. And for that matter, you need much information to take a decision, whether to place his money in your hands or whether his money is in the safe hands or it is not in the safe hands.
The response to that is that the information is available. I think everybody has said that. The information is really available out there. But I think your point is that the information available isn't enough and isn't as detailed as what the managers of the banks and the Bank of Ghana has, correct?
The on-site report by the Bank of Ghana is not available in the public. They report back to the Bank of Ghana, and you cannot access that information on the Bank of Ghana website. And that report is more detailed as compared to the audited audit report. Yeah. How many people understand audit report? At the end of the day, they tell you it's true and fair. Only that sometimes you see emphasis of matters. And whether somebody who is reading the audited report understands emphasis of matters, most of the information are kept in the management letter, whether the bank is complying or not complying. Fantastic. And this letter is addressed to the management. Fantastic. For that matter, the public doesn't have access to that.
I know you have something to say on this, but I want to quickly go around. I see a hand there. I don't know if it was on this same matter. Nana, do you want to hazard? Nana, do you want to help us with this? Your own thoughts on how the bank can do this balancing act? Because I think even you mentioned that as well. So let me hear the gentleman in the back there. He has a contribution on this. Yes, sir.
Okay, so back to the same point. The information is out there, yes, it's correct. But how come we have 9 banks in distress? And now
we don't know these banks.
We don't know these banks, right? So my point is that Bank of Ghana has certain ratios, key ratios that they measure those banks with. And for instance, if you look at the published financials, banks are supposed to state how many times they've breached the Bank of Ghana liquidity ratio in a year, right? Certain key ratios. Most banks don't state that in their published financials, right? So what we are saying is that, and liquidity is key. Bank of Ghana, the liquidity that the banks publish in their financial statements is at a point in time, while the BOG on a daily basis assesses this bank's liquidity. Okay, and using Unibank as a key example, they said they couldn't get access to certain information. So, as a Ghanaian, it implies that if I take a total of 35 banks, I can just do a rough assumption that maybe 30–40% of those banks, Bank of Ghana doesn't have access to key information, right? So what we are saying is that the key information that you require from those banks to assess their health, make it available to us. We're investing public. We're financial analysts. We can make informed decisions. And let me take you to different jurisdictions like the US and Europe. Disclosures are key. They're very, very key. The MD salary and all those things, right? So people won't run on a bank when detailed informations are available for them to add 1 + 1.
Including bonuses, by the way. It's very well known.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we're saying is that don't think Ghanaians can make informed decisions. Don't think the depositors can't think. I mean, put all those information out there. They will add 1 + 1 and get the equation and make their own decision, rather than being taken by surprises. Every now and then, this bank is under administration, this bank is, it's not nice. It's not the best. And I think we need to, so if we're requiring banks to, Bank of Ghana to put out this key information, then we need to also put measures in place to know that, okay, these are the remedial actions that Bank of Ghana is likely to take if I think the information out there shows that this bank is likely to go down. Then over time, people will know that, okay, if this bank is going down, Bank of Ghana will take this action, A, B, C, D. It's clear. If the bank gets to this state that liquidity is below this range, this is what Bank of Ghana will do. If it goes beyond this state, this is what I will do. If you go to stage 3, I will bring in a receiver.
So before it gets there, I can decide to go and take my money, or I'll leave it because I know central bank will do something.
Yeah.
So that's what we're asking for.
Yeah, and just to answer that, and Nana made a point about naming and shaming. If the banks know you're going to do that, we are all asking for, it will prevent them from taking all these bad decisions because we don't know anyway. All the time, but the only time you know is when they are going under. Like I found out on that morning when I panicked. Okay, I don't know if there's more contribution on this before I come and get my final comments on this all-important one, because I've seen 4 people commenting on this, so I thought it's such an important thing for us here and those listening. So, the ball in your court again.
Let me just say that I do understand the point about transparency, and transparency is very helpful, and I think the Bank of Ghana really believes in transparency, and that's why we come out. We require the banks to publish the financial statements. We expect the analysts, the financial analysts, to dig deeper and to advise the public as to what they believe is the health of the banks. I do not know, in the interest of transparency, still, I haven't seen any country that publishes on-site examination reports anywhere in the world. So that is not a matter of transparency. Transparency is good, but as a supervisor, you go and do your on-site inspections or examinations. You come back, you dialogue with the bank and its managers and board. You come back, you understand what's going on with the bank, and look within your toolkit to see what it is you can do to help the bank straighten out. And you manage that. That's not something you need to come out in the public to say, oh, we did an on-site inspection, we found this, and we've asked the banks to correct it, and so, by the way, everyone needs to know. That's not how you regulate the financial market, the financial industry. It is important that the regulator does its work, and the regulator takes steps to very quickly get banks to take prompt corrective action to regularize whatever is found that is not regular. And I think that the public needs to have trust and confidence in the regulator. We're doing our work. We're taking all the competing interests together and striking a balance and ensuring that we have a stable and resilient financial system. We cannot come out and announce every time we find something. Trust that we are employing all regulatory tools available to us to ensure that the banks are safe and sound and that your money is safe. And you have seen in the recent past that when we've had cause to intervene, when all else has failed and we have found cause, we intervene. And we do that in a way that promotes stability generally and also protects your money. So please have confidence in us. We believe in transparency. We're not trying to hide anything. At the same time, we believe in using all the tools available to us to ensure that the banks themselves take action to correct what needs to be corrected. And if they don't, then we step in and intervene, take over the bank, or put in any other measures that are required to ensure that your money is safe.
Thank you. Kwame, I don't know if you want to comment on it, because you represent a bank. Do you mind if all that information, the data that is published, naming, shame, etc., that we've heard, do you mind?
So there are the two categories of information that I believe is being discussed. One set of information relates to regulatory and audit matters, which are basically between the management of the institution and either their auditor or the regulator. I believe that information is privileged. But I think the request or the comment that has been put out is a fair one, in that the levels of disclosure should be further enhanced. And one of the areas where, so for banks, I believe one of the areas where a shift could occur, and it's a function of regulation and the law, is that there's got to be some qualitative disclosures or discussions of the bank's performance and state of affairs and financial health. I think that the numbers speak for themselves, but I guess what I'm hearing is that that is not enough, and to the extent that, and again, I'm not a policymaker, I'm not a regulator, but I guess to the extent that there can be sort of a one-page or a two-page overview of certain key areas, and for management itself to disclose. I think asking the auditors or the regulator to disclose is a bit, I think, in conflict with either the confidentiality that exists. But at the same time, because we go out there and ask for deposits, we have a responsibility to disclose. And I think that this responsibility should be a requirement on management to have, whether a paragraph in developed markets. I would say that, and typically most of the banks are listed. They are very few. It's tough to be a bank and to be private. Most of the banks are listed. As one of the conditions of being a listed entity is that you have to disclose quite extensively. And this is disclosure, and you disclose this at the risk of going to jail if you mislead or you provide information that is inaccurate.
We don't have that here.
Let me just say that for banks that are listed here, of course, the Stock Exchange has rules on disclosure requirements, and so does the Securities and Exchange Commission. But regardless, the Bank of Ghana, or the Banking Act, requires banks to truthfully disclose the state of their financial affairs.
Forgive me for interjecting again. I've heard a lot of the requirements, but the question is about whether the requirement is written, but whether they are actually doing what the laws requires them to do, and whether the Bank of Ghana is cracking the whip if they are not doing so. I guess it's a question that everybody's asking.
I thought we were talking about the level of disclosure. Yes. That's what I was,
whether the level of disclosure, as we have it now, is adequate, one, and whether even what we have, if it's not adequate, is being complied with.
Okay, so that's a separate matter. That's an enforcement issue. And like I said before, we're very, very committed to ensuring that the rules are complied with, and we will enforce. We will enforce. Someone had mentioned earlier on, I think it was Nana, some of the banks have not yet, for instance, published the financial accounts. It used to be that, they got away with it. They're not doing that anymore. They have written to us, as usual, to us for an extension, an exemption, and we have refused. We've given them a deadline. You need to comply by this date. You need to comply by this date, or we sanction you. So we're very serious. I've got my team of bank supervision staff here. They're cracking the whip. You cannot not publish your financial statements. If you don't, we're going to sanction you.
Are the current rules regarding disclosure adequate, in your view?
That's a separate conversation.
I just want to ask you briefly on that. What do you think, having studied the books, the laws that we have, are they adequate?
There are two, as Kwame was beginning to say, there are two different levels of disclosure. As a bank, as a company, you're required to disclose. As a bank, we require you to disclose and accurately reflect the state of your financial health. And that's everything. Quantitative, qualitative, everything, okay? If you were listed, you have even more stringent disclosure requirements because every Tom, Dick, and Harry could own a share. And so you're required to publish even more in detail. I believe under current banking law, the requirements for disclosure are quite stringent and are quite strict. We can definitely have a conversation about what else is missing, and we're happy to have that conversation going forward.
I think that was the point I was making, that most of the disclosures that are published in the dailies are arithmetic, they're numbers. And in terms of the discussion point, I think that's the point that Deputy Governor was making, that management can be required to provide a lot more qualitative disclosures than is the case. But I think it's important to realize that whether listed or unlisted, banks publish information much more so than private companies do. So banks are publishing information on a quarterly basis, whether you are listed or not. And that is an enhancement on the requirement of the Companies Code. This is a requirement that is peculiar to banks. But the issue has to do with probably additional qualitative information. But I think it's important to stress, though, that these things don't happen overnight. I know you made the point that you showed up at the bank or you found out in the morning.
Yeah.
Banks don't collapse overnight.
Okay.
Never. There's so many warning signs, and I think that it is incumbent to the public to be a lot more discerning. I think it's a point that I feel quite strongly about, that there's so many data signs, your data points. The point around the rates is a very important one, that if you consistently see a bank, offering rates that are significantly higher than the peers. That in itself is a warning sign. And someone used the G word. I don't want to repeat it here. But there's a bit of that in our society. And these are some of the shifts that need to occur. But yes, banks have a responsibility to disclose.
Thank you very much. And I must just add that, as you just mentioned what I did, the bank I decided to sort of close my account in and take it elsewhere eventually was put under administration. So, seriously, eventually was. And this is a whole year later after I've taken that decision. Final round, and then we'll wrap up. Yes, please. I have a lady. Not you, gentlemen, forgive me, but I need to take the lady. Can I get a microphone to the lady in front, please? There's one there. Okay, yeah. Let me take that. I'll come to the lady. Okay. Come to shortly. And I'll come to you definitely, gentlemen. Don't worry. Yeah. Yes, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Gerhard. I'm a member of the MCA, Microcredit Association of Ghana. And much as we want to give Madam Deputy Governor a break, unfortunately, the buck stops at their door. So we may need to put them under the cosh until we get the kind of results that we need. And this has to do with the enforcement bit that she talked about. Okay, the intervention up until when everybody is satisfied. And if I could take her back down memory lane a little, when we talked, she talked about the fact that as and when it was needed, they were helping banks which were distressed. The question is, how swift and how prompt is Bank of Ghana to distressed banks? How swift are they? At what point will they eventually say, okay, enough is enough? We are taking over, we are putting you under receivership, or we are putting you under management, or whatever it is. Because actually, delayed justice, we are told, is almost synonymous to denied justice, okay? If you delay, for example, if I'll take Bank of Ghana maybe back a year with, again, reference to the Unibank issue. From their own statement, they said that Unibank provided inaccurate information. Now, that sounds a little criminal. Inaccurate information. That's what they said. And I'm quoting from Joy Online. And I'm sure Mr. Facilitator wouldn't dispute that.
No, the statement, the issue said that.
Okay, so that's what they said, inaccurate data. Now, they stressed again by saying that they persistently suffered liquidity shortfalls and that the Unibank was on life support for over a year.
In fact, the word they used was virtually insolvent.
Okay, okay. I'm just using one adjective to describe that. Okay, and then they said, after they persistently suffered liquidity shortfalls, they also said they consistently breached cash reserve requirements. So after persistently suffering the shortfalls, now they consistently, okay, breach cash reserve requirements. Now, how prompt is a central bank in intervening or enforcing it? Because again, going down memory lane, I recall Bank for Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, in 1992. They were taking off the clearing house. Another bank was asked to do their clearing for them, I recall very well. So at least there were signs of distress in the system. So if you had accounts with BCCI, you would know that the earlier I take my monies out, the better for me. Yeah. And so when they eventually folded up, there wasn't too much in a brouhaha. Like you wake up on a Monday morning and you're told Capital Bank and UT Bank are off. Okay, so at least I don't know what assurance they can give us of how swift and how prompt their interventions are with regards to this. Because we're told some time back, when you look at the resource 5,000 and the Pyram issue, yeah, they were very much aware of the existence of these people. They sat and looked on, and eventually people's deposits got messed up. So the question is, how swift and how prompt are they in dealing with some of these issues, and not tell us that these people have not been doing something for 1 year. And so we've come after a year and a half, 2 years, and we have taken them off life support eventually.
Thank you very much. And I'll add another word, how proactive. Can I please get the microphone in front? please? Because I want to hear the lady in front. And then we'll wrap up our conversation with the key bullet points of how we can keep our banking sector healthy going forward. Yes, please. Your name, please?
Yes, my name is Yang Yang. I have a question about microfinance companies in Ghana. You see, I am from China. It's quite contradictory. In China, I don't see any microfinance companies. Actually, if the interest rate is about 30% per annum, China, they regard it as illegal. So the owner can be sent to jail, can be sent to prison. But in Ghana, the microfinance companies are paramount. For example, if you go to any community, you can see DKMAS and Ideal Finance, Dialects, all these finance companies. Because I am from a heavy-duty industry, sometimes some of my clients, they're coming to buy a truck from me. When I ask them, where do you get the finance? They told me they're getting from this microfinance company, and the interest rate per month is over 4%. Then I was confused. How can you earn enough money to pay these microfinance companies? And in the meantime, they are telling me it's so difficult to get money from the banks because the banks, they're only buying the government shares. They don't want to lend. And in the meantime, the foreign banks like Zenith and UBA, these Nigerian banks, they don't lend money to consumers, to Ghanaians, but they're doing so well to Ghana, like the Ghanaian banks, Unibank. They're lending money to people, the happy Ghanaians, to grow up their business, but they're facing problems. So I get confused. What is happening in Ghana?
Thank you very much. So you see why I was looking for a lady all along. Final question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Evans. My name is Hector Wolf. I'm a consumer protection activist. First of all, I would say that the closure of banks and lack of liquidity is not only a failure of regulation, but also failure of consumer protection organizations in Ghana, I admit. I heard confidentiality. To the consumer, there is nothing like confidentiality. I would like to suggest to the Bank of Ghana, the regulators, to at least quarterly publish list of banks in good standing, banks or financial institutions in good standing, so that at the end of the day we will know those who are in good standing and then know how to deal with them. And then those who are not in good standing, well, fair enough, we'll find a way of dealing with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for all your questions and contributions. Let's wrap up now. I would give final word to Madam Mahaji. So I'm going to start from this side and end with you. So yes, the first question about, okay, that goes to the Bank of Ghana. But the contribution, what is happening in Ghana? She's given us the China experience. If you go beyond an interest rate of 30%, it's a crime in China. And she's doing business. People are coming and they're taking loans, paying interest rates of more than 4% a month. What is happening in Ghana?
So I guess her question had different facets,
absolutely,
and
yes.
I'll try and touch on them. I think we're in a market where the regulator doesn't place any caps on deposit rates or lending rates. I think it should they? I don't believe they should. I don't believe they should. And I think we've touched on regulation quite a bit. There were three things I highlighted at the beginning: the regulation, behavioral shift, and then the policy, this policy bit. I think the point she raises speaks extensively to the policy shift that is in Ghana, or that needs to happen in Ghana, and a little bit to the behavioral shift. She indicated that business come and complain about their inability to borrow from banks. I think one of the most important things we see as banks is that businesses come looking to borrow with inadequate capital. So the owners themselves are not risking enough of their wealth before approaching the banks. Now, that is one of the features of our economy, in that the ability to access grants or to access equity funds is quite limited. But there's also a behavioral shift that needs to happen, whereby entrepreneurs, rather than rushing to go solo, should pool their resources together to build some level of equity base and present themselves as more attractive to banks. I did speak about risk. There are two types of risk: equity risk, debt risk. Banks only take debt risk and shouldn't be taking equity risk. That's because we're lenders, we're not investors. In many of these instances where we're approached by clients, we view the business ventures as speculative and the businesses as having very little equity. I'd say that the microfinance institutions have a much higher tolerance for risk than the banks, and that is reflective in the rates. And invariably, some of those institutions are actually taking on equity risk. They're doing the work of investors as opposed to the work of borrowers. But that speaks to the third point I made, in that as an economy or as a country, we need to put in place policy interventions that makes equity much more available. I think pension reform has started that. We've seen that there have been some amendments to the pension laws that allows pension funds to invest in equity funds and have those equity funds then invest directly. I think that the pace of transformation should be accelerated. In most developed markets, the pension industry is one of the largest sources of both private as well as public equity, and that's the policy shift that needs to happen.
Thank you very much. And I'll take your final thoughts also, following from the questions that we've asked.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll lend my voice to what Kwamina has just said. I mean, the dynamics and the role that banks play in our economy is perhaps what has led to some of the issues the lady identified. And those things are evolving. And I think we'll get to a point where we have greater clarity in terms of the roles of the different operators or players in the financial system. So I believe that will take care of itself. But I just want to finish off by talking about the commentary. A lot of the discussion was about the regulation, transparency, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that I don't work at Bank of Ghana, but I think Bank of Ghana finds itself in a difficult position because one of their objectives is to ensure the stability of the financial system. So it's a balance between the level of information that you put out there and the potential impact of that. One of the things I said at the beginning was the interconnectedness of the system. And whereas we may think that we're trying to protect depositors of one particular institution, putting out certain types of information could inadvertently affect the whole system, which ultimately becomes a problem for the larger economy. But having said that, I think the point is well made, that a discussion perhaps ought to take place about where to draw the line in terms of the balance between transparency and ensuring stability.
There's a suggestion at the end about publishing banks in good standing. Do you think that will help?
I'm not sure that will take us any further to the level of transparency people are looking for, because at the end of the day, as we've all said, information is out there, albeit at a point in time. So typically, it's at the end of the year, you can see a bank's balance sheet, you can see certain disclosures that are available. But I think the questions were around what happens in the intervening period on an ongoing basis. Which brings me to my final point, which is about the stakeholders working together. And the key stakeholders here really are not just the regulator or just the auditors, but management, directors, shareholders, living up to their responsibilities, which are now set out in the policy that Bank of Ghana has put out, and in general company law. as well as the industry requirements. Customers themselves and educating themselves, being vigilant, understanding what's going on, the investing community, like you mentioned. So I'd like to finish off by saying that the points are well noted, but it's a collaborative effort. There's room for improvement, but I think some of the initiatives are already in motion, and we look forward to their success.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Awaji, your plate is pretty full. Wrap it up for us. And I guess the final thoughts there for the last question that came from the other end is, what assurance can you give us? And I guess it's a good place to end the conversation. What assurance can you give us that you're being proactive, you're being fast and expedited in your actions to deal with banks that are in trouble?
Thank you for that. Well, I just want to add onto everything that's been said and everything I've said already, that indeed the Bank of Ghana is committed to ensuring a safe and stable financial system. We have been the ones who've come out to say that we made some mistakes in the past, and that some of the problems of the failed banks that you know about, UT, Capital, and Unibank, was as a result of laws that we did not enforce ourselves. And we have also come out to say that we will not continue to forbear. There will be no regulatory forbearance. We will enforce the rules, and we will do that swiftly. Now, I'd like to say that I think we've shown that we're living up to this commitment. We're intervening where we need to. Even where you haven't heard of interventions, we're taking steps to sanction banks who flout our rules, and that's an ongoing process, which we're committed to continuing in. On the issue of transparency, I believe, like I said before, the Bank of Ghana has no problem with transparency. And we are very happy to disclose what needs to be disclosed when it needs to be disclosed. In between, please trust that we're doing our work, and all the information available to us we are using to ensure that the financial system is safe. We're taking appropriate action when we need to do that, and when the public needs to be told of that, they will be told of that. In the meanwhile, rest assured that we as a regulator, we're doing our part. But you, as users of banking services, must do your part. And you've heard that so eloquently articulated here. Please do your part. Ask the questions. Talk to your banks. Ask them, why are you paying me so much interest? What are you doing with it? What are you going to invest the money in? How are you going to be able to pay? And what's going on? Now we have the Ghana reference rates, which was mentioned earlier on. Hopefully this ensures that banks, or the lending rates banks are giving out, are moderate. We see inflation going down. Our policy rate was cut by 200 basis points in March. And so we are really interested in seeing banks bring down their rates in conjunction with the falling inflation rates and policy rates. If your bank is promising you, or your microfinance is promising you rates that are out of the roof, and you're happy with that, then you're part of the problem. So let's work together. We expect all stakeholders to work together, and please support us when we take action to protect your money, because in the end, we all want to make sure that our financial system is stable. Let me just respond to the consumer protection question and say that the Bank of Ghana is really interested in consumer protection. We set up a market conduct office, which looks at, so our bank supervision department looks at the safety and soundness of banks. Our market conduct office looks at the behavior of banks in relation to their customers and the financial market as a whole. We do have a hotline, a complaints hotline. You can call the Bank of Ghana and ask to lodge a complaint. If your bank is not treating you well, if your microfinance institution is not treating you well, we care about that. We want to know. Please call the Bank of Ghana. There's a hotline, and you can lodge a complaint, and we will investigate and get to the bottom of it. So all in all, Bank of Ghana says thank you for having us at this forum, and we're really interested in ensuring that the banking system continues to be safe and sound so that all depositors are protected, and indeed all customers of banks feel safe and confident to deal with the banking sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in summary, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And in summary, it's clear that boosting the health of the banking sector or banking in Ghana is a collective responsibility, one that must be borne both by those who are working in the banking sector, directors, managers, shareholders, etc. But most importantly, I've heard, you, the customer, myself included, we have a responsibility to show interest in what the banks are doing, seek the information actively. If we don't find it, in fact, that should be a signal that something may be wrong. And as we just heard there from the Bank of Ghana, there is a mechanism they set up for you to report if you have some concerns. And I guess a fundamental point coming from the audience is transparency. And I think that's one of the overwhelming messages we're getting from here. And I guess going forward, the Bank of Ghana has indicated they're willing to discuss this a bit more, looking at the adequacy of the requirements we have now, and should we add further layers of transparency to what already exists. That's a conversation for another time, but at least we've touched on that and the things that are most important to you, the customer. I want to say a big thank you for joining us here at the Labadi Beach Hotel for this breakfast forum. It's been quite revealing. Boosting the health of the banking sector is a very, very complex task. Regulation